party appoints an arbitrator, but the two arbitrators cannot appoint the third arbitrator. In that case, 11 subclause 6b will apply, and then if there is a failure, the parties can proceed to the court. The third is 11 subclause 6c. A person, including an institution, fails to perform and function interested as ICA to appoint an arbitrator, and if ICA fails to appoint an arbitrator, in that case also the parties can refer to the court for appointment of arbitrator. Now, let's come to the second topic of this. That is when procedure is not provided, then what will happen? So there are two aspects to this. One will be three-member arbitral tribunal, one will be one-member arbitral tribunal. Now, if it's a case of three arbitral tribunal, then one party has to make an appointment within 30 days. One party has to make an appointment, then it has to send that particular appointment according with the notice of invocation of arbitration to the other party, and the other party from the receipt, mind my words, it is the receipt of the request that will be taken as a limitation for the purposes of 30 days. It is not when the notice was sent, it is when the notice was received by the second party. If he fails to appoint within 30 days, right, then they can approach the court. Similarly, if both the parties have appointed their respective arbitrators, party A has appointed arbitrator A and party B has appointed arbitrator B, and if this arbitrator A and arbitrator B are not jointly able to appoint the third arbitrator within 30 days, then also the parties can move to the court. The third thing is that if now, the third thing is in respect of one-member one-member arbitral tribunal. That is, that if the party fails to concur, supposedly there is party A and party B. Now, party B fails to concur the name proposed by party A and does not appoint anyone within 30 days. In that case, this particular provision will be hit and the parties can go to the court for appointment of arbitrators. So this is the whole scheme of section 11 as far as appointment of the arbitrators and the role of the court is concerned. Now you will notice one thing, the towards the right hand side, if you see under 11.6a, 6b, 6c, right? In all these three subsections, you won't find a timeline provided under the section. There is no timeline provided that it has to be within 30 days or it has to be within 21 days. Whereas in 11 subclause 4a(b), you will find, and 11 subclause 5, you will find that there is a specific timeline that is of 30 days. Now, what is the relevance of this timeline? That we will explain in the next cases that we will be dealing. Next slide, please. Now, this particular dispute for the first time arose in Tata Switchgear Limited versus Tata Finance Limited. I was not able to find a case prior to this, to be honest. It was one of the first cases in which this particular dispute arose, and a sitting judge of the Supreme Court, which is Justice Rohinton, was a senior counsel appearing on behalf of Tata Finance. Now, what happened, interestingly, in this case was that the one of the party was to appoint an arbitrator. Now the party failed to appoint an arbitrator within 30 days. Now it was an arbitration where the procedure for appointment was provided by the parties. Now the party failed to appoint so. Now the question was the question was whether in case falling under section 11 subclause 6, the opposite party could appoint an arbitrator after the expiry of 30 days from the date of demand. Now, if you recall, 11.6 does not provide for a limitation period of 30 days. It doesn't. So the question was that whether the limitation of 30 days that is provided under 11 subclause 4 will also apply to 11 subclause 6. So the court in this aspect says that no, it won't apply. And that is the distinction between 11 subclause 4 and 11 subclause 6. Supposedly, if it so happens that the procedure for appointment of arbitrator is provided, one party recommends a name, party A recommends a name to party B, it's a three-member arbitral tribunal. Party B fails to appoint an arbitrator. I move a petition under section 11 before the court to appoint an arbitrator, right? Now, if I have already moved a petition to the court for appointment of an arbitrator, then the second party cannot appoint. But supposedly it so happens that till 30 days, party B has not appointed his arbitrator, right? After 30 days, I am about to proceed in a petition under section 11, but before the filing of section 11 petition, party B appoints an arbitrator, meaning that those 30 days which are there, I waited for 30 days. Now, the arbitrator is not appointed by party B. I take roughly 5 days to draft a petition and to file it before the court. In these 5 days, appointment is made before the filing of my petition. Then I can't take the ground that he did not appoint within 30 days, and therefore his right to appoint an arbitrator is forfeited and you should appoint. That's not the law. The court said that after 30 days, the right to appoint an arbitrator is not forfeited. It will continue till a petition under section 11 is filed by the other side. So this is the law that was laid in Tata Switchgear, and it has been subsequently followed in Punj Lloyd versus Petronex in 2006 and very recently by the Supreme Court in another judgment. Let's move to the next slide. Now, can the court appoint an arbitrator without following the procedure under the Arbitration Act? Now, this has become very relevant because the whole gamut of case laws in this regard were diverse. And it was only in Indian Oil Corporation that concrete observations on this particular aspect were laid by the court, and it was ultimately followed in Union of India versus PESCO in 2017, a very beautiful judgment written by Justice Bhanumati. Now, what happened is that the facts were that there was an arbitrator to be appointed by the parties. The parties failed to appoint an arbitrator, right? Then the parties referred for the appointment of arbitrators under section 11 subclause 6 of the act. Now the question was that supposedly a party has failed to appoint an arbitrator. Is the court required to follow the procedure for appointment provided under the Arbitration Act? Supposedly, the arbitration agreement provides that only retired railway officers will be appointed as arbitrator. Then, if the party fails to appoint an arbitrator, then is the court bound by such requirement under the Arbitration Act? Is the court required to only appoint a retired railway officer? So there are three important cases which were discussed, and the whole timeline of the decisions by the Supreme Court on this very aspect was also laid down and discussed by the court. The court said that seen earlier, the law was that it is the party's autonomy to appoint an arbitrator at the first place. It is only when the parties have failed to appoint an arbitrator that the court will appoint, meaning thereby the primacy is with the parties to appoint an arbitrator. Then there was a slight erosion in this concept. In ACE Pipeline, the court said that once the party has failed to appoint an arbitrator as per the arbitration agreement, and if a petition is filed before the Supreme Court or the High Court, as the case may be, for appointment of arbitrator, then the court is not bound. And in exceptional cases, the court can appoint any third person it wants, which is not provided under the arbitration agreement. Means it can deviate from the arbitration agreement while appointing an arbitrator. Now, there was a complete erosion in Union of India versus Bharat Battery, wherein the court said that I'm sorry, if the parties don't appoint arbitrator under the arbitration agreement and they come to the court for appointment of arbitrator, the court is not bound to follow the procedure provided under arbitration agreement. Meaning that it can suo motu appoint an arbitrator, right? But the court then identified the problem into this. The court felt that when the parties have agreed for a particular type of arbitrator or arbitrator with particular expertise, then the arbitration agreement, being the very foundation of arbitration, has to be respected. And this is precisely the reason the court has now come to the conclusion that the Chief Justice, as it was before the 2016 amendment, the Chief Justice will have to appoint an arbitrator as per the procedure that is provided under the Arbitration Act, right? And the arbitration agreement. The court cannot deviate from the arbitration agreement. It has to appoint as per the arbitration agreement. It will only be in exceptional cases where justifiable, mark the word, justifiable doubts as to independence and impartiality of the person so nominated is taken by the parties. So this is what the law has been laid in Union of India versus PESCO. Right? Now let's go to the next slide. Now, this is another problem, and if you read these two judgments side by side, one given by the DB of the Delhi High Court and one given by Justice Bhanumati of the Supreme Court, you will find that there's startling difference. Both have gone with one doctrine of the Arbitration Act. Now, as you know, that Act provides for is supported or is founded upon various doctrines, and two of the most prominent doctrines are that the agreed procedure by the parties have to be respected, and it has to be a procedure which is of expeditious disposal, leads to expeditious disposal, means arbitration has to be quick, it has to be an effective remedy on one hand, and second, that the parties' autonomy to appoint has to be respected. So what happened in Jindal Steel Power Limited versus State Trading Corporation of India was that a Section 9 was filed by a party before the High Court. Now, under Section 9, certain interim reliefs were sought. The court didn't grant that relief. Then, appeal under Section 37 was filed against that Section 9 order before the division bench. Now, in this appeal, what happened? The court said that, sorry, we are not going to give you interim relief. Then a suggestion was made by the council that my lords may appoint the arbitrators. Because ultimately, if my lords are not giving me Section 9 relief, the constitution of arbitral tribunal will take time. And ICA is very slow. That was the remark made during the proceedings. ICA is very slow. And my remedy under Section 17, if any, will become infructuous by the time an arbitral tribunal is made. So the court said that instead of ICA appointing the arbitrators, what the court can do is that the court can appoint arbitrators out of the panel maintained by ICA. The court thought it is a good solution. The other side, though, objected to it. The other side said that, see, it is the ICA that will appoint, not the court, and therefore the court can't appoint it. So to this, the court said that I'm sorry, that submission is not good enough, because one of the principles of Arbitration Act is that there has to be expeditious disposal. And therefore, suo motu, we will appoint an arbitrator, and before him, you will submit your dispute, you will submit your application for interim relief, and then he can decide the matter under Section 17, and he will provide you interim reliefs. So that was a very good way in which the court gave a very equitable solution. Now, the other side went into appeal, saying that, see, under the arbitration agreement, it was clearly provided that it will be the ICA who will appoint an arbitrator, not the court. And the court suo motu cannot appoint. Again, it's a correct view, because the autonomy of the parties have to be respected by the court. And that is what the Supreme Court then said in State Trading Corporation versus Jindal Steel. Same case, it was in appeal before the Supreme Court. The court said that, see, if the parties have provided for the procedure, that procedure has to be respected by the court. Expeditious disposal cannot mean that you do away with the autonomy of the parties to appoint and the procedure provided under the arbitration agreement. And therefore, the court in a Section 9 petition cannot suo motu appoint an arbitrator disregarding the procedure provided for appointment of arbitrators under the arbitration agreement. And that is now binding before the court. But these two judgments, one of the DB of the Delhi High Court and the same being appealed before the Supreme Court, shows that there is a challenge and there's a clash between, at one side, the agreed procedure, and on the second side, expeditious disposal. But who wins finally? It is the agreed procedure by the parties that eventually wins. Now, next slide, please. Now, we have now seen three things till now. Let me just summarize it for you. The first thing that we have seen is that the parties will first have the autonomy to appoint an arbitrator. In case they fail, then only the court will appoint an arbitrator. We have also seen the timelines, the difference between 11 subclause 4 and 11 subclause 6. We have also seen that procedure provided by the parties is important when appointment is made even by the court. We have also seen that the parties as well as the court cannot deviate from the procedure for appointment. Now we come to the case that supposedly there is a section 11 filed by the parties for appointment of arbitrator. The other side raises objection that I'm sorry, all these claims that have been stated are time barred, therefore no arbitrator can be appointed. Or the party says that it is a non-arbitrable dispute, or he says that there is no arbitration agreement at all, or the party says that I am not a party to that arbitration agreement, or the party says that these particular disputes that are alleged by the party is beyond the domain or beyond the jurisdiction that is conferred by the arbitration agreement to the arbitrators. Now, all these are sets of questions that may be raised under Section 11, but who will decide and what will be decided under Section 11? Now, let's see the approach that was taken by the court before the 2016 amendment made by it in the Arbitration Act regarding this, where, as I have told you earlier, that the word existence of the arbitration agreement was provided and it was the sole ground for not appointing an arbitrator under Section 11. And this was by way of amendment. Now, let's see what was the position pre-amendment, right? So, the first the principles were, the broad principles were stated by the constitutional bench in SBP and Co versus Patel Engineering, wherein the court said that under Section 11, the court has to see the following things: whether there was a valid arbitration agreement, secondly, whether the person who has made the request under Section 11 was a party to the arbitration agreement, third, whether the party is making the motion has approached the appropriate High Court. Now, with these, I have actually no problem, right? These are okay. The fourth, all threshold issues with respect to jurisdiction, the existence of the agreement. Now, as far as jurisdiction is concerned, I have a problem. But as far as existence of the agreement is concerned, I have no problem. Whether the claim was dead or time barred, claim sought to be resurrected. Now, this was a big problem, because try to understand, already the Supreme Court and the High Court are overloaded with cases. There are so many cases that are now pending before the Supreme Court and High Court. Why do you want to burden them more by allowing them to venture into all these disputes, when that easily can be decided by the arbitrator under Section 16? Now, let's go forward. Whether the parties have concluded the transaction by recording the satisfaction of their mutual rights and obligations and received the final payment without objection under Section 11. Now, again, this thing is also to be decided by a court under Section 11. So that was absurd. Now, National Insurance Corporation versus Boga Polyfair tried to restrict it a little. They said that there are three types of things that can be seen under Section 11. One is which has to mandatorily be decided under Section 11. Two is which the court may choose to decide under Section 11. Three is which has to be exclusively left to the arbitral tribunal. What were those questions? Now let's see that. What has to be decided mandatorily, the court said, whether the party is making the application has approached the High Court, approached the correct High Court, that's okay. There's no problem with this. whether there is an arbitration agreement and whether the parties who have approached under section 11 of the act is a party to such an agreement. That is also okay and fine. Now, this was the worst part, which is may choose to decide. What? Whether the claim is dead, long barred claim, or live claim. Now, why should the court decide this when the arbitral tribunal can directly decide it? That was another concern. Second thing, whether the parties have concluded the contract transaction by recording satisfaction of the mutual rights and obligations or by receiving the final payment without objection. Again, why should the court decide this when the arbitral tribunal can easily decide it under section 16? Now, it is precisely because of this reason. And just remember one more fact. SBP also said that any finding that is given by a section 11 court will be binding upon the arbitral tribunal. And that created more confusion that the court is already overloaded with cases. There are so many pending cases there before the court. And now you are allowing the court to decide under section 11 all these things by presentation of voluminous documents. And that is why the Law Commission 246 report stated that the jurisdiction of the court under section 11 should be curtailed and should only be exercised to see whether there is existence of arbitration agreement or not. Next slide, please. This is what the Law Commission 246 report stated. I have already told you that its main intention was to restrict the intervention by the courts in an arbitration proceeding. The Law Commission stated that precisely because of this reason, there should be amendment made, and therefore amendment was made under 11.6a, which stated that the court will confine to the examination of the existence of the arbitration agreement. Means existence of the arbitration agreement is only to be seen by the court. Right? Next slide, please. Now, Dura Felgura essay clearly stated. Uttarakhand Purv Sainik Kalyan Nigam Limited also stated. I think the later one was a judgment by Justice Indu Malhotra, who clearly stated that after this particular amendment that is made, 11 subclause 6a, this new section that has been added, or sorry, the subsection that has been added, after this, the parliament has legislatively overruled SBP in this very particular context. And now the court is only required to see the existence of the arbitration agreement. Earlier, if I recall that someone asked a question as to what is the meaning of the existence of an arbitration agreement. To that, I said that I will answer it later when we will be dealing with the issue in context of section 11 and section 16. Now I will give you the answer. See, arbitration agreement may provide for a dispute resolution clause. The court only has to see that. But the court should also see whether that particular arbitration agreement is valid under law. Supposedly, it so happens that it is on an unstamped document, right? Then the court will say, no, but I can see arbitration agreement. That's okay, fine. If it's not stamped, what's the problem? No. The Stamp Act clearly says that if stamp is not paid on a particular document, then the court will impound it and it will not be effective till the complete stamp is paid on it. And only after payment of stamp can the document be relied for the purposes of reliance on that particular document. Right? And this is precisely because of this reason. The court said that if a document is unstamped, then the court will not appoint an arbitrator. But as we have seen earlier, yesterday, that under section 9, the court can grant interim relief as per the Bombay High Court judgments, which are now under challenge before the Supreme Court. But under section 11, according to Garware rules, the court will not appoint an arbitrator because it is not a valid arbitration agreement, right? Second thing is that supposedly if it so happens that there is a question of limitation, or the party alleges all these claims that have been raised, my lords, by them are all time barred. The arbitration agreement stands concluded. There's nothing left, or they are barred by limitation. The court says that, see, limitation being a question of fact and law together, is to be decided by the arbitral tribunal under section 16, and we won't comment on it. So if a particular claim is time barred, that won't be a ground for non-appointment of arbitrator, because there exists an arbitration agreement which is valid under law and not null and void, right? So this is what the court has said. The court also appreciated the doctrine of competence, which means that the arbitral tribunal is competent to decide its jurisdiction. And even if it so happens that the main agreement is void, the contract is void, the arbitration agreement or the arbitration clause being severable from the main contract, the arbitral tribunal, by using competence and the principle of severability, can decide the validity of the contract or not, or the eventual rights and obligations of the parties, right? So this is Uttarakhand Purv Sainik Kalyan Nigam Limited, a very beautiful case. One must read because it's not a very long case to spend time upon. Next slide, please. Now, this is appointment of substituted arbitrator. Now, I'll tell you what is a substituted arbitrator. Supposedly, there's an arbitrator already there, right? The arbitral proceedings are going on. Supposedly, the arbitrator dies or he resigns. He says that, no, I don't want to continue with this arbitration proceeding. Or the parties are willing to substitute that arbitrator. Then what will happen? The court have given answer to this also. The court has stated that substituted arbitrator is provided under the act. It can very well be appointed. There's no problem with it. But the question is whether the substituted arbitrator to be appointed is to be appointed in the same manner as the first arbitrator was appointed, or any other person can be appointed as substituted arbitrator, meaning thereby that is the requirement of appointment of substituted arbitrator be in accordance with the arbitration agreement. If the agreement says that only a retired railway police service officer can be appointed, is the substituted arbitrator required to be a retired service officer of the railway board? The answer is yes, he is required to be, because substituted arbitrator is no one. He is a person who is filling the shoes of the earlier arbitrator, and therefore all the qualifications or all the procedural requirements provided under the arbitration agreement has to be complied with in appointment of substituted arbitrator. Next slide, please. Now, this is important. So see, there is section 11 subclause 9, which says that in case it is an international commercial arbitration wherein the nationality of the two parties are different, right? In that case, it is advisable that the appointment is such wherein the arbitrator appointment is not of the nationality of either of the two parties. The question arose is whether it is mandatory or directory. Now, the court in Dolphin International Limited said that it is mandatory, right? The word may that is used under section 11 subclause 9 has to be read as shall. But later on, the court in Malaysian Airline System BHD, as well as in MSM Netherlands BV versus Larsen and Turbo, the court have clearly made it clear that if you read the UNCITRAL model law and also the commentaries on UNCITRAL model law and various rules that are passed by various countries, you will find that nationality of parties, an arbitrator being different from the nationality of the parties, is merely directory and not mandatory. If a very good arbitrator is appointed by the court, a retired Supreme Court judge, his change of opinion or his opinion cannot be based only on his nationality. He is an arbitrator of integrity. And therefore, the court said that it is not mandatory but directory. But I, to be honest, strongly disagree with this approach. No doubt, the interpretation of the court is based on various rules, but you will also find in various rules that it is mandatory. And I feel that the court should take the ultimate reason why the Arbitration Act and amendments have been made. To attract foreign investors, there has to be assurance that, see, You won't be dominated by the arbitrator of our nationality. That assurance has to be given to attract more and more foreign investors. Because I would like to comment again, in public law or in constitutional law, there is a principle that justice should not be done but also seen to be done. There should be not any likelihood of bias, right? So foreign investors are usually businessmen. They won't agree that your nationality arbitrator is appointed. So in order to attract more and more foreign capital, I think this clause now should be considered mandatory. That is my suggestion, though the law on this subject is to the contrary. Next slide, please. Now, appointment of third arbitrator. Now, the question in this case arose, Grid Corporation Orissa versus AES Corporation, whether supposedly party A and party B appoints an arbitrator each. Now, these two arbitrators have to appoint the third arbitrator. Now, supposedly it so happens that these two arbitrators say that okay, orally they say that fine, or they send a written communication that fine, I will appoint Mr. C. The another arbitrator also says okay, I am fine with Mr. C, and third arbitrator is appointed. Now the party's consent was not taken for appointment of third arbitrator, and that was precisely the issue in this case. The issue was whether in the appointment of third arbitrator the consent of the parties are required. To this, the court said that I am sorry, it is not. The third arbitrator is to be appointed by the two arbitrators already appointed, and there is no requirement to have a conference together. They can merely exchange their views on this, and if it is in compliance with that and the arbitration agreement, it is fine, there is no problem. Next slide, please. Now, grounds for challenge. Now, this is very important because this is highly litigated, and because of the shortage of time, I'll just explain you the sections and the few case laws that I have taken out. Now, ground for challenges, if you see that the arbitrator, first of all, is required to disclose in writing the circumstances. Now, see the words are very important. Either directly or indirectly of any past or present relationship with or interest in any of the parties or in relation to the subject matter in dispute, whether financial, business, professional, or other kind, which is likely to give rise to justifiable doubts on his independence and impartiality. This the arbitrator has to disclose in writing. The disclosure has to be in terms of Schedule 6 form. Second, which are likely to affect his ability to devote sufficient time to arbitration. That's okay. Particularly his ability to complete the entire arbitration within a period of 12 months. That's also okay. No problem with it. Then it says that arbitration can be challenged. Then it says that arbitration from the time of his appointment and throughout the arbitral proceeding shall without delay disclose to the parties in writing any circumstances referred to under subclause 1 unless they have already been informed by them. So that it's very clear that it has to be disclosed, all these things. Now there's a difference between Schedule 7 and Schedule 5. Now let's understand the explanation 1 that I have not read as of now. The grounds stated in the fifth schedule shall guide in determining whether circumstances exist which give rise to justifiable doubt as to the independence or impartiality of the arbitrator. Means Schedule 5 is just guidance. Appreciate that and always remember this. Now let's come to subclause 5. Subclause 4. A party may challenge an arbitrator appointed by him or in whose appointment he has participated only for the reason of which he becomes aware after the appointment has been made. Now, subclause 5 is very important. Notwithstanding any prior agreement to the contrary, any person whose relationship with the parties or the council or the subject matter of the dispute falls under any of the categories specified under 7th schedule shall be ineligible to be appointed as an arbitrator. Meaning any person who fails to comply with the 7th schedule, not the 5th schedule. 5th schedule only requires the disclosure and to decide whether such disclosure, the facts stated therein, amounts to a justifiable doubt on his independence and impartiality. That is fifth schedule, a guiding factor. Seventh schedule says that if you are in conflict with the seventh schedule, then you cannot be appointed as an arbitrator. But there is something else also provided that the parties may subsequently to disputes having arisen between them waive the applicability of this subsection by an express agreement in writing. Meaning thereby, if you recall, section 4 of the arbitration says that parties can waive their rights. Now, this is not an answer here. Here, the waiver has to be in a different form. Merely in providing in the arbitration agreement or participating in the proceeding will not lead to a waiver under section 12, subclause 5 proviso, because it clearly says that the waiver has to be an express waiver, and that too after writing. Right? So the requirement of waiver under this is very strong. It is to be only there after the disputes have been referred to arbitration. It is to be in writing by the parties. Right? Now we will understand and appreciate why this is important in the cases that I will discuss next. Next slide, please. Now, these are all the cases that have been discussed. Now, I'll tell you why the amendment was brought. I forgot to tell you that in this also, these amendments were brought by which the schedules were added as well as various subsections were added to this particular section 12. Now, why it was done is because there is a guideline by the name of IBA guidelines, right? These IBA guidelines are considered to be soft law in international arbitration, and these IBA guidelines provided for three lists: the red list, the orange list, and the green list. Now, the green list, people falling under the green list were eligible for appointment. The orange list, it was some conflict whether they should be appointed or not. Red list, completely barred. And this is what has been taken by the Indian legislature, this soft practice in international law regarding appointment of arbitrator provided in the IBA guidelines was incorporated and was suggested by the 246 Law Commission report, on which the Parliament acted, changed the law. And now this soft law has become hard law in India in the term of section 12 of the Arbitration Act, read with schedule 5 and schedule 7. Now let's see the case laws. Now this was the first time discussed by a judgment by Justice A.K. Sikri in Wonstelpeen judgment, New Metro Railway Corporation, wherein the facts was that the purchaser was to appoint arbitrator, a retired, the purchaser was to appoint from a list of retired arbitrators, from a list of arbitrators, the nominated arbitrators who were retired government servants. Now, the other side objected to it, saying that I'm sorry, you cannot appoint a government servant because that will be in violation of section 12, subclause 5. The court said that no, it won't be. Because see, this particular retired government official does not at all have any time of disqualification in respect because of his relation with the subject matter of the dispute, his relation with the respondent, his relation with the dispute that has arisen. If there is no dispute about this, then there is no restriction on his appointment. Second was TRF Limited versus Energo Engineering Project Limited. This is a very beautiful judgment written by Deepak Mishra, Justice Deepak Mishra, but there was some confusion in this judgment, which has later been clarified by the courts. So in this judgment, the court stated that a person, a MD, cannot appoint if a MD is to be appointed as an arbitrator under the arbitration agreement and he is hit by schedule 7, then he cannot also nominate an arbitrator, right? So neither he can be appointed as an arbitrator, but also he cannot nominate an arbitrator in his place, right? So this was the issue. The arbitration agreement provided for the nomination of the MD. In case the MD is not able to be appointed as an arbitrator, he will appoint the sole arbitrator for deciding the dispute. And this very thing was challenged before the court. The court said, sorry, it is a clear-cut violation of 12 subclause 7, 12 subclause 5. He cannot be appointed as an arbitrator. And precisely because of this, the court appointed an arbitrator. But why is this relevant? Because the court clearly said that an MD who is himself eligible from appointment as an arbitrator cannot appoint an arbitrator in his place. Understood? This was clarified in Perkins Eastman case. And this is a very beautiful judgment given by Justice UU Lalit. He said that, see, there's a distinction in TRF between one member arbitrator tribunal and three-member arbitral tribunal. If it is a case of one member arbitral tribunal, it will be the law that MD cannot appoint an arbitrator. That's okay. But if it is a three-member arbitral tribunal, in that case, MD can appoint, the other party can also appoint, and both together can appoint the third arbitrator. No doubt, independence and impartiality will be seen for all. There's no problem with that, but there's an aspect of balancing of the interest, because one is appointed by him, the another one is appointed by him, and they both together appoint the third arbitrator, and hence there is no problem with it. Similarly, in Government of Haryana versus GF Toll and Central Organization for Railway Electrification, the clause provided that retired railway officers will be appointed. Now, the issue raised by the party was that how can retired railway officers be appointed? They are now related to the respondent. How can they be? Then the court interpreted entry 1 of Schedule 7, which says, and it is to be interpreted, if I remember correctly, the word used was in the present tense. Yeah, the word used was is an employee. The court said that only an existing employee cannot be appointed as an arbitrator. But if he is a if he's an employee who is retired, in that case, for two things: if there is no justified doubts regarding his impartiality and independence, if there is no justifiable doubt, then he can very well be appointed, because under entry 1 of Schedule 7, it is only a person who is in active involvement or active participation of that particular body that cannot be appointed as an arbitrator, right? But as far as a retired person is concerned, he can be appointed as an arbitrator. The court also gave an additional reason that why should people who have expertise in certain type of dispute should be abandoned merely because they belong to that particular organization once 10 years back. Why should it so be? That's why the court said that only person who are in under employment consultation actively, means that at present they cannot be appointed. But person who has already retired, and if there is no justifiable doubts regarding his independence and impartiality, he can be appointed as an arbitrator. That is what all these cases are. Next slide, please. Now, this is termination of mandate and substitution of arbitrator and competence of the arbitral tribunal to rule out its own jurisdiction. As far as section 16 is concerned, I would like to just submit this, that section 16 I have already discussed, that Uttarakhand High Court case, where the court has clearly stated that the arbitral tribunal will decide all the issues relating to merit as well as their own jurisdiction. It is only the existence of the arbitration agreement that will be decided by the court if a appointment is made under section 11. But if supposedly the parties appoint an arbitrator, the arbitrator is now acting, and there is now a dispute raised that there is no arbitration agreement at all, or there is no contract at all, then the arbitrator can decide. Just try to follow this what I said. They can be two possibilities. Number one, if the parties don't agree with the arbitrator, then the court appoints it, and the court, while appointing it, will see whether there is an existence of an arbitration agreement or not, right? That is possibility number one. Possibility number two is that these two parties appoint an arbitrator. The arbitrator is now in session with the dispute, and now he finds that this particular contract is void. He can rule on his own jurisdiction, and that is precisely what the doctrine of competence is, which is imbibed under section 16. Second thing is, if you see, the doctrine of severability is also there, which says that if the arbitration clause is a part of the contract and the contract becomes void, it won't ipso facto affect the arbitration clause itself. So the doctrine of separability as well as competence both are recognized here, right? Last thing I would like to tell you is that supposedly if it so happens that the party does not challenges the jurisdiction of the arbitrator in section 16 proceeding, he is not barred from challenging it before the before in the section 34 proceedings. That's what the court has said. I think this is the SMST states judgment by Justice Roington, which has made very clear on this aspect. As far as section 15 is concerned, that relates to termination of mandate and substitution of arbitrator. That provides certain grounds where he withdraws from office for any reason by the pursuant by or pursuant to the agreement by the parties, that arbitrator can be removed and a substitute arbitrator can be appointed in his place. That is what is provided under section 15. Now that's, I think, all for today. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So can I just take questions after a minute? Just a minute.
Sure, sir.
I am so sorry. Yeah, tell me. Any questions that are there on this?
Yes, sir, I have few questions beforehand. So the first question is, what procedural rules are arbitrators bound by? Can the parties determine the procedural rules that apply?
Yes, they can. They can easily, if supposedly they go for institutional arbitration, that is the SEAC rules. The SEAC provides for their own rules. Then the procedural rules will be binding on the arbitrator. Else, if the parties, and if you remember the clause that is provided under the Act is that particular section in the Act is that unless the parties agree otherwise. So if the parties have not agreed upon the procedure, the arbitrator is free to decide the procedure he wants to follow. And I think this will be dealt in detail by my friend Mr. Vikas Chand Shukla, who will be dealing on this particular aspect.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next question is, so I think that we have received one question. When arbitral tribunal decides and when court decides the mandate of an arbitrator?
I beg your pardon, I didn't get it. Please.
So I'll just take the next question. This is like a long question. I'll break it into two. So the
Okay.
next question is, does parties to a foreign seated arbitration have recourse to Indian courts for relief?
Yeah, I told you yesterday na, that they can file Section 9 if they want to. If they are coming for the enforcement of the award in India, then along with the enforcement petition, they can also file interim relief application under Section 9. And because of the virtue of Section 2, Subclause 2 of the Arbitration Act, which clearly states that even in foreign arbitrations, the parties are free to appoint the arbitrator. So that's not a problem. Additionally, it can so be that, as you remember, that in foreign seated arbitration, the seat of arbitration is outside India. So, as the seat being outside, the supervisory jurisdiction of the court will be outside India. So, that court will only have the power to do all the things for that particular arbitration to be conducted. To that extent, Indian courts will have no role. But as far as enforcement of the award is concerned and interim relief during the enforcement of award is concerned under Section 9 and Section 47, in that case, the courts can be approached.
So thank you so much. So the next question is, this one is related to seat versus venue debate.
Okay.
So it says, if party merely mention a venue where the arbitration is to be held without expressly providing for a seat or place of arbitration in the agreement, whether
Okay.
the place mentioned is the seat of arbitration or the venue of arbitration.
Very good question. So, see, there was a judgment in Hardy exploration, and now that has been held to be not that a good law. I'll tell you the facts. I think in Hardy, what happened is that Singapore was provided the venue of arbitration, and Indian law was to apply. So the court said that because Singapore is provided as a venue of arbitration, and there is no, what do I say? There is no other identifying factor regarding the identification of seat or the procedural law that will apply. Therefore, the seat of arbitration is India, and Singapore is merely the venue of arbitration. Now, that particular logic that was given by the court was held by the court, I think, in the next judgment of some BG Saw or something. There was a case which we will be discussing. Don't worry, my friend Mr. Shukla will be discussing when he will be coming to the discussion of seat and venue in greater details, because the data arbitration sections also deals with the same. But I'll just tell you, in the next case, the court doubted the correctness of this judgment, Hardy exploration, and said that if the law, even if the Indian law is provided as the substantive law to be applicable, if there is nothing provided regarding the curial law or the procedure, the law that is applicable to the arbitration agreement, then the seat, the venue that is provided by the parties, and if the intention of the parties and the closest nexus that can be seen with the dispute is outside India, then that particular venue will become the seat of arbitration. And it won't be India which will be the seat of arbitration. That's what I remember. But don't worry, we'll be dealing it with greater length when a lecture will be conducted on this aspect.
Thank you so much, sir. So there's a question which says, I don't know if you can tell me if it's the question is clear or not. It says, suppose 2019 amendment is notified and section 11(6)(a) is deleted by such notification. Whether the courts designating arbitral institution will examine existence of arbitration agreement, or the same would be examined by the designated arbitral institution.
See, I think principally the court 11 subclause 6A was not only it was something that was out of their necessity, and as we are now moving uh, with commercial arbitration and being consistent with the world practice at large, I think the courts will be reluctant to go back to the earlier approach that was by SBP. No doubt, 11 subclause 6 A does away with legislatively with SBP, but even if it is that is done away by the legislature, which the legislature won't do, but if it does, I don't think the court will go back. The court will continue with the existence of the arbitration dispute as the ground.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. So let me just take the last question, which says, is there a limitation period for the enforcement of arbitral awards?
Yeah, there is. Don't worry, we will be doing it when we do it with section 45 and 47. There was a dispute regarding 3 years or 12 years before the Bombay High Court, and now the Supreme Court, I think, has come to the authoritative dictum on this in the interpretation of Article 134 of the Limitation Act, if I can recall correctly. But don't worry, the answer will be given to you when we will be doing section 45 and 47 of the Arbitration Act. Don't worry about that.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Because that is something for others to venture upon, because this will need an explanation. Bombay High Court said something else, Supreme Court said something else. So that's why.
Sure, sir. So it looks like we have covered all the questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Nothing. All the very best. This was my last lecture today. Tomorrow on, my learned friend Mr. Vikas Chand Shukla, Mr. Ajay Avasthi, and the faculty member Ms. Soumya of MNLU will be conducting the session. So it was a good session with all of you. Yes, there's just one thing. Yesterday, there was a specific question asked to me, and I wanted to give a clarification today. Yesterday, a specific question was asked to me whether a party can be detained in civil prison under Section 9. To be honest, that question, at that time I said that yes, if there is a contempt committed, then they can be imprisoned, but that won't be civil prison because the party then needs to be convicted for the contempt of the court. But as of now, I have no answer regarding whether the party can be detained for in civil prison for under Section 9, because Section 9, according to me, is just for preservation of property, inspection of property, various interim reliefs. And civil prison is something provided by CPC if a person fails to enforce, if the person, if trying to enforce a decree and the other party is not willing to get his decree enforced. It is a procedure that is provided under the enforcement proceedings. So I'm not sure about this, but I'll make sure that if I get any judgment on this, I will surely let the people know through the other speakers who will be speaking after me now. Thank you so much. It was a lovely association with all of you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chahat, for coordinating and moderating this event, and as well as the NLU students. It was an excellent move by you. MNLU students, I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for such insightful and knowledgeable session. And I would also like to thank everyone for being a part of this lecture today. We hope to see you all tomorrow for tomorrow's session. Thank you so much, sir.